welcome to Unit 2, Module 1, the early 60s, this transitional period that we talked about. Previously, we talked about how pretty much all the early rock and rollers got out of rock and roll for one various reason or not, and pretty much everybody hated rock and roll too. Pretty much the churches and the politicians and the jazz singers, and everybody just hated all of this new style of rock and roll music and so forth. So let's talk about some of the trends that happened after rock and roll had done, after it had shaken up the market initially. It was fragmented into all these different directions, and basically 60 to 63 is this transitional period that we're talking about. So we have, let's talk about each one of these. We have the Vestiges of the 50s, the emergent folk music trend, surf music, and the dance craze. All right, so let's talk about each one of these one by one. Let's start off with the Vestiges of the 60s. And the term vestiges is basically like the remains of something. So you think of the Roman, if you go to Europe and you see the vestiges of the Roman Empire through their aqueducts and bridges and whatnot, is what remains. What's that there? So this is some of the remains that happened that is from this rock and roll period here. In the 60s is a little bit more softer, a little bit more held back, more of a Pat Boone-ish type stuff going on in the 60s versus the mainstream rock of Little Richard that we talked about. So we have a more teen idols coming out, like a Bobby V or Bobby Vinton, Sedaka on there. So maybe a good example would be listening to Calendar Girl from Sedaka, Blue Velvet, Bobby Vinton. And as you listen to those, is that really rock and roll? And what elements of rock and roll are you hearing? Is it the beat? Maybe there's a little bit of a backbeat still there, a little bit of fun and spontaneity in there in comparison to the pop music of the early 50s. Kind of listen to that there. A group like this is like the Four Seasons. Is a girl like a song like Sherry? Is that rock and roll? Blue Moon by the Marcels on there, is that rock and roll? On there, is comparison now, is it over the top like Little Richard? Is it more like Chuck Berry, or is it nothing at all? So again, when you listen to these things, listen and compare and contrast. That's the whole reason why we're listening and studying rock and roll history, is to be able to listen to music and compare and contrast what's going on there as well. We have some novelty songs from the period as well. The Lion Sleeps Tonight by the Tokens would be one, and also some music from soundtracks. So a theme from A Summer Place, right? And probably Percy Faith would be the one that would be the most popular version of that. So these new seeds have been planted, and no longer are we talking about these hard rocking bands in the mid '50s like the Chuck Berry and Little Richard. The music is a little bit more square and not as controversial going on here during this transitional phase here of rock and roll. The rock beat's still there, but it is watered down and as compared to the music of the mid-50s. Also along with this, again, socially what's going on in the 60s, a lot of things are going on politically, socially, and so forth like that. And so if you're like in college, you're not going to want to listen to the same music as your teenager brother or sister, little brother or sister is listening to. So if you listen to some of these roots of this folk music, one that pops in mind is Herbert Belafonte's Banana Boat Song, or the Deo song. Listen to that. If you actually look up the lyrics and read the lyrics, and what's the song really about? And it's about folks working hard, picking bananas, and dangerous and so forth. And you work all day. It's a tough song. Well, bands like the Kingston Trio. Check out Tom Dooley, and another good one is the M.T.A. By the Kingston Trio. Check out those two examples of that. And is that rock and roll? Well, clearly it's not rock and roll on there. And the thing about folk music was the folkies hated the rockers, hated the rock and rollers. So they wanted to be as far away from rock and roll as possible. So they didn't use electric instruments. They stayed away from the 12-bar blues because that was the basis of mainstream rock and roll on there, and they tend to use more acoustic instruments. And also, their voices are pretty clear, so you can understand what's going on because the words are important to them. So they want to make sure the words are clearly enunciated when they're doing their music. Peter, Paul, Mary is another band that pops to mind as being one. So like maybe the cover of Peter, Paul, Mary's "If I Had a Hammer." You probably know Puff the Magic Dragon. Is this rock and roll? What are these songs about? The hammer. If I had a hammer, is that a real hammer? Hammer out injustice and and so far. Like, is that a real hammer? Is it a metaphorical hammer? And so now we're getting to the point, is this music to have a good time? Is this music to dance to? Or is it something else? And what happens with this folk music is music for you to actually sit down there and listen to. And you know you're really, and you're having the social commentary, maybe something to get together with your friends, and you listen to and you talk about. Or they listen to that same record and you talk about it next time you ran into them. So it's not music necessarily to dance to, it's music to think to in a lot of ways. So anyways, this new series of lyrics and social political importance comes more. We'll talk more about this as this unit goes on as well. Now we kind of get a little bit more of a stratification going on between the groups. So if you're 18 and 24, college age, you have this more of the folky type music, and then if you're a teeny bopper, 17 and below, more of the pop music and whatnot. Now that's not to say that there's a crossover going on. Of course there is, but in general that's kind of what was kind of going on in this time period here. Now we kind of get, and also with folk music, the LP tends to be the main focus for these folk records as well. Now we get to another type of thing that's uniquely American in a lot of ways, is this surfing music. And we have, you think of the surf music, and unlike folk music, was trying to be serious. The key words are fun, and even more fun. You think of these surf movies they had back then, and Annette Funicello, and those. If you haven't seen any of those surf movies, surf movies, maybe check out some clips on the internet somewhere, and see how they were. And just fun, having a good time. And the center of this is California. And how is California different than any other state in America? Well, California is basically the melting pot of America. Everybody has dreams of being stars or famous or rich or whatever. You go west, young man. So you go to Cali, and you go there, and you find yourself. And you know, you're in the drives. You can drive. Things are really close together there. You go to various places really easily, and you have these beautiful. The weather's great there, and those beautiful scenery and things like that. But there's a little hint of tedium that's there as well in some ways. With all this beauty and all these things going on, you have to work harder because there's so much competition and things like that. So that kind of comes on you. America is the melting pot of the world, and without it being the melting pot of the world, we would never had blues, we never would have jazz, we never would have rock and roll. And you think of all the music that we've given the world, it's pretty amazing. Well, let's talk about the Beach Boys. And Brian Wilson, Carl Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Mike Love, and El Jareen are the members of the Beach Boys originally. And they basically are in the 61 period when they start making music in a lot of ways. And if you listen to Surfin' U.S.A. By the Beach Boys, and I want you to listen to Chuck Berry's Sweet Little 16. Does it sound a little familiar? Well, what happened was that Brian Wilson used the same chords and same melody as Chuck Berry's Sweet Little 16 for Surfin' U.S.A. And I think he didn't realize you couldn't steal someone's melody. Things you can copyright, things that are not things that you copyright are words and melodies. You can't copyright chords. You can't copyright a drum beat on there. And the recording of it you can copyright, but not the actual. I can play the chords to Hey Jude right now, and I get sued because I'm just playing chord changes. Now if I sing the melody, well, that's why I'm not singing a melody on there. And if you go through there and listen to that, you kind of hear the difference in there. But you know, what's this thing? Now, does Surfin' USA sound like rock and roll? Well, I mean, you hear that on the guitar part. Yeah, it starts sounding like rock and roll, doesn't it? So now we're getting to the parts where it actually sounds like the mainstream rock and roll that we talked about a couple of years earlier. And there, so check out Surfin' USA on there. I Get Around is another one. If you read the lyrics of that one, on the surface it's kind of like about cars and having a good time. But if you really read below the lines a little bit, I'm getting bugged driving up and down the same old strip. In some ways, you kind of have this working class ethos going on. Making real good bread. Talking about money in there. Brian Wilson, as a arranger and producer, he was inspired greatly by Phil Spector's recordings, and he wanted to compete with the Beatles by making music that was better than the Beatles. So that was his focus was to do that. So check out "In My Room," was one of my favorite Beach Boys tunes. And if you read the lyrics to that, is that rock and roll? Well, it's a little bit more of maybe a ballad, more of a soft rock, and it's really interpersonal in a lot of ways. And at this point here, Brian Wilson had a nervous breakdown, and he pretty much could not go on tour. In some of the interviews I've seen, he's basically saying, "Yeah, I just couldn't stand about going on tour. I just couldn't. The thought about going on tour I just couldn't do it. I wasn't going to do it." So he didn't go on tour, and so he stayed home and he worked on songwriting and production values of that. And with that comes around one of the major records that every rock and roller needs to know about, Pet Sounds. That's the first major concept record. So Google that, read about that, and you'll learn a lot more things about it. And basically, a concept album is an album of all these things connected together. And this album is basically about love and God and alienation. Those are the themes, or the concept of this record here and there. So check out one of my favorite songs from that record, from Pet Sounds, is "God Only Knows." And if you listen to it, do you hear any non-traditional instruments? You hear that French horn that starts it off. It's like, wow, that's not a rock and roll instrument, but does it work? Yeah, it does work. It works in a lot of ways. Then, check out "Good Vibrations." "Good Vibrations" is an incredible piece. And how is this different than any other rock song that we played? It's technically more sophisticated than any other rock song at the time there. Tempo changes, harmony changes. The use of a theremin, which was an electric instrument. I'm playing a theremin in one video if you want to go see what a theremin looks like. And it basically is a woo instrument in there. And it really shows that rock and roll can do a lot of really great things in it. It's not only restricted to only playing bubblegum music or 12-bar blues. It can be much more than just that as well. Well, with this, one interview I saw, Dick Clark has asked, what's the most important rock and roll record that ever came out? And he said, "The Twist." And, "The Twist? What do you mean?" Well, that was the first time everybody could acknowledge they liked rock and roll. And with that record there, of course, when anything gets popular, what's going to happen? Everybody else and their cousin comes out and records a version of a dance song. So if you check out the Twist, which Hank Ballard originally wrote and Chubby Checker covered on there, and check out both. But check out Hank Ballard's version of the Twist and Chubby Checker. It sounds pretty close to the same. So much so that Hank Ballard actually thought it was him on the radio. He's like, "Finally, I'm getting some white radio airplay. I'm going to be a superstar." They said Chubby Checker. He's like, "Oh," this break his heart, I'm sure, in a lot of ways. Sam Cooke's "Twisting the Night Away," the Olympics, "The Bounce," the Watusi by the Orange, the Little Eva, the Locomotion, the Capitals, the Cool Jerk. Even Elvis Presley had something called "Do the Clam." If you want to hear one of Elvis's probably worst songs, "Do the Clam" is probably one of the ones that get it's at the top of the chart there on that. And what do all these songs have in common? Well, they're short, they're 2 minutes long, they're based on the 12-bar blues. They have a groove factor with them, with that backbeat going on there, and we kind of go from that point there. One cool video, if you can find it, or you see that in the Blues Brothers, Ray Charles does "Shake Your Tail Feather," and you see all these little dance movements going on in that video there. So if you can watch the Blues Brothers or find it online somewhere, you can kind of see all that going on. "Twist and Shout." We kind of go with that with the Isley Brothers, and I originally thought that they did the original version of it. It's actually a band called the Top Nuts, the "Twist and Shout." So you can check that out, and you hear it's not really that good. And then the Isley Brothers take it to another level, and then the Beatles get it and they rock out with it. So we'll talk about the British invasion next. So rock and roll.